Hello and welcome to When They Popped. I'm Kelsey.
And I'm Mary, and today we're joined by someone who literally wrote the soundtrack to our Y2K childhoods. As a key member of the legendary Cheiron Studios team, alongside Max Martin, our guest penned massive hits like Backstreet Boys' I Want It That Way, NSYNC's Bye Bye Bye, Britney Spears' Born to Make You Happy, and Celine Dion's That's the Way It Is. He's a 6-time Grammy nominee, and his songs have sold more than 150 million physical records and have been streamed over 1 billion times. Dialing in all the way from Sweden, Andreas Carlsson, welcome to When They Popped.
Well, thank you. Thank you. It's wonderful to be with you guys.
Well, we are thrilled, let me tell you. Now, I'd love to start this interview learning a little bit more into your journey into songwriting. We actually read that you started your music career as an aspiring pop singer yourself, and that you actually opened for the Backstreet Boys in Sweden in 1996. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. Back then, I was signed to BMG Records because, first of all, mid or early 90s in Sweden, there were no such things as songwriters and producers for international artists. We had to sort of invent that profession because who would go to Sweden to record a record, So it was mainly Swedish artists who were dreaming about making it outside of Sweden. And I was one of them, but it was kind of hard to figure out who I was. I was sort of like a boy band singer on my own before sort of the boy band thing had taken off. And I had signed a deal with BMG, and I put my record out, and parts of that record was done at Cheiron Studio, which is, sort of the main hub for all the boy band music that would come and that would fall. So I did my record, and it didn't do too well. I was out touring it was Miss Sweden contest going on at the time. So I was traveling around. I was singing at every contest, which was great. I was like in my early 20s. It wasn't a bad gig. And one day, my record executive called and he said, I have good and bad news for you. And I said, so what's the bad news? He said, your record is not doing that well, And I was like, okay, well, I figured. But the good news is that you're going to open for this, I think it's a German band, because Peter Andre canceled this part of the tour. And Peter Andre was this like ripped guy from the UK. I certainly didn't look that way back then. And I was like, why would they replace Peter Andre with me? That makes no sense at all. And my music is completely different, etc. But I said, well, you're going to open for this German band. And they're quite popular. They're just about to, they're taking off at the moment. And we thought it was a great gig. So they had one song out, which was We Got It Going On. So obviously I'm talking about Backstreet. And I think maybe some station had started to quit playing games. So they were still in like tracksuits, and it was very much like, the early Backstreet stuff. So I remember I'm going to this big kind of like concert hall. It's like maybe a 2,000-3,000 seater. So they were not playing, arenas yet. It was still kind of like grassroots following and hysterical fans. So I'm coming in completely in the dark. Someone has just told me to go to the arena. You're going to be there in time, play this couple of songs. And when I walk out on stage, it's like being on a tarmac next to sort of a 747, starting the engines. I mean, it was so loud and so crazy. And I see some like screaming teenagers, first row, like, with my like little silly like postcard that says, my name has a picture of me. And I was like, oh my God, is this what I signed up for? And I do my songs, do my little routine. And at the end of the last song, I couldn't hear anything because everyone was going like, Backstreet Boys, Backstreet. And I was like, okay, well, I guess that's it. Thank you, everybody. The stage. And I see the guys, and there's like this area where all of the girls that have been pushed against the, what do you call that, fence?
The barrier or
yeah, exactly. Who's like passed out, and there's like medical people, and I think Howie comes up to me and is like, "Oh, great, you did great, and we have to go on soon. We just want to spend some time here with our fans." I mean, it was like the beginning of something that was really, really, special at the time. I had never seen like hysteria like that. And when I walk off the stage or walk into my dressing room, I bump into Denniz Pop and Max Martin. And I remember Dennis said, "Sure you don't want to be a writer?" It's like, maybe. And that's how it started.
So after that concert, after opening for the Backstreet Boys, that's when you connected with Max and Dennis, and that was what led to you getting your foot in the door as a Cheiron writer?
Cheiron, if you're interested in that time, was kind of like walking into I haven't seen Willy Wonka, but it was that type of thing. You're walking into a magical world where everything is like kind of happening behind closed doors. And there was like Studio One. There would be Max Martin and Denniz Pop like chain smoking, and the music would make sort of the whole building just move. It was so loud, and there was always like another band in there. But I was kind of like always walking down the stairs into Studio 2 where I was working. I was working on my solo record. But I remember that a guy would pop in and he would open the door to just listen. He said, "I want to sound like that." And that was Justin Timberlake, because they were recording the first record. They did Tearing Up My Heart and all of that. So it was kind of like a magical place, And when I said to Dennis, I called him and I said, "I'm going to give up my recording career and I'm ready to start writing." I was kind of like welcomed like into this world. It was kind of like a brotherhood. I remember I even got my own jacket that said Andreas on it. And I was like sleeping with that jacket. Like it was so precious to be part of that collective. And, back then it wasn't the legend that it became. Sort of, it was still kind of like popular over here. And, they had big hits with this, African dentist, Dr. Alban. It was like Ace of Base. And everyone's like, well, they've already peaked. It can't be bigger than this. And of course, I walked into sort of the spaceship just before it was about to take off. Very special time.
That's incredible. Now I would love to get into the sound that you guys created, the Swedish sound, if you will. We hear a lot about, Max's melodic math formula when it comes to music. How would you describe, the Cheiron team's approach to creating the Swedish sound?
Well, it was kind of interesting because the songs had a certain structure. So whenever you walked outside of that structure, Max would come into the room and he said, no. It has to be this way. And I think he picked it up from Dennis. And Dennis was not really a producer. He was more of a DJ. And when he produced music, it was more from the perspective this has to make people move on the dance floor. So he had this ginormous speakers. And then he would listen to a mix and he would push the faders and he was like, no. And he'd go till he kind of felt it. And when he felt it, it was like, that's it. Now it's going to work. So all of the stuff we did was super formatted. And I remember we took a lunch break, me and Max, and they were working on Everybody by the Backstreet. Oh my God, we're back again. Don't, brothers, sisters, everybody sang. That was the first verse. And we went off and had sushi or whatever. And then we come back and Dennis was like, no, I don't like that. Second verse has to be an event. If you hit everybody, let me hear you scream. Whoop, whoop. And it's a totally different sort of detour from the song. And then it comes back, am I sexual? Am I original? Whatever it is. So for Dennis, it was supposed to be entertaining at all times. It has to have this little thing. And then we used what became sort of known as the Cheiron sounds for sort of the sparkle on top. Everything had to be riff driven because we were hard rock guys originally. So it was dan, 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 and it was it was a sound called the manic shot. And once we started using these sounds and we saw that people reacted to them, it was we would not do anything without using the same sounds on every song. So that became sort of the signature. So it was the formula, which Max has later on described that as music math or whatever. And it was the arrangement, but it was also the particular sound that made Cheiron instantly recognizable in everything that we did.
We certainly hear those sounds on Millennium, especially. We have to talk about I Want It That Way.
Yeah, absolutely. What do you want to know?
Everything.
Yeah, literally everything. So we read in an interview that you did with Billboard that the way that you came to write it with Max was sort of by coincidence. Can you tell us about that?
Well, I mean, it wasn't really coincidence because as I gave up my artist career, Dennis said, you and Max are going to write together. I was like, okay, I guess we're going to write together. Yes. So the first session I did with Max, and it was like the worst day of my life. It was me, Max, and Bryan Adams. Bryan Adams came to Sweden to do a record called The Cloud Number 9 or something like that. So I was brought in and it was horrific. I tried to be part of something and I was like completely new to it. And, you know, Max was the master and here's this like legendary artist that I idolized as a kid. So I was sitting in there as the third wheel and I tried to like come up with stuff and add stuff to the session. But, you know, Max and I would continue to write and he would most of the time give me sort of like embryos or seeds. And one particular day he had an interesting idea that he presented to me, but the whole thing had sort of a fun intro, if you will, because we were working around the clock and we were friends, you know, we were like in our mid-20s, but we were kind of brought together. I mean, I would probably not have hung out with any of these guys unless Dennis had told us you should hang out with him, you should work with him. The two of you, you know, would be magic. So we were like 7 or 8 guys that were like brought together as this like odd team of guys. So one night when myself and Max had been in the studio working late, this was before any of us had any real money. I remember Max had a little bit of money because he had been successful earlier, obviously. But it was like, we were not on any crazy like spending. So he said, maybe should we take the subway back? Or, yeah, let's split a cab. It's pretty late. So he goes like, okay, we're going to Soho. I was like, Soho? That's where I live. You live there? Yeah. And then he said the address and it was like, hey, hang on a bit. You know, that's my address. What building? And then, you know, we're actually in the same building. And I was like, okay, what floor? First floor. But I'm on first. There's only like 2 apartments on the first floor. So we're like next door neighbors. And we had been so for a while because his now wife, Jenny, she had an apartment there. So my girlfriend and Jenny were neighbors. And I moved in with my girlfriend, who I wrote Bye 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 about in another song, When You're Looking Like That for Westlife. And Max moved in with Jenny. So we became neighbors and Max would like knock on the door very early in the morning. He said, I have an idea. And I was like, okay. And one day I would remember very well because he just like opened the door and he started singing this new thing, which was I Want It That Way. I mean, a lot of it. And he said, I want you to work on the lyrics. I have this start here. You know, we have a chorus, blah, blah, blah. So I try to write a better verse, you know, for the second verse of it. And, you know, we came up with a bridge and all this kind of stuff and worked on the chorus. And I just couldn't come up with anything as good as the first verse. So I'm not sure if it was him or me or whatever, but we thought maybe the second verse could be a question. So it goes, am I your fire, the one? And then the chorus didn't make any sense. Like, wanted what way? You know, you are my fire. Okay. It was already vague as it was, but the second verse made it like totally mysterious as some people would refer to it later on. But we loved it. We recorded the song. Clive Calder, who was the executive, he's the founder of Jive Records and Zombie, said, this is the first single. And they were always very good at picking like, this is the one we're going to go with. Like even before they had heard the rest, we got it. This is the one. But you guys have to come up with a different lyric because this doesn't make sense. And at this point, the band had already recorded. And I think, I might be wrong, that they also did that video, you know, where they're walking on the airport, etc. And Mutt Lange, who was married to Shania Twain at that time, who was also a Jive Records artist, because Mutt and Clive Calder was business partners, both from South Africa. So whenever Clive had some sort of problem, he would call Mutt and vice versa. So he says, Mutt, can you help out with this song? We can't really figure out what it's about. So Mutt would fly up from, I want to say, Switzerland, and we wrote a completely different lyric. And we re-recorded, the band came back. We made a huge effort in making them sound exactly the same, and I'm sure you guys have heard it. It's on YouTube. I think they re-filmed the video and everything with this new lyric. And then when it was done, everyone was like, I don't like it. I don't like it either, you know? Yeah, it makes sense now, but it doesn't sound that great.
So the Backstreet Boys announced that they're coming out with Millennium 2.0 to celebrate the 25th anniversary, and they're going to be releasing No Goodbyes. And it's sort of been this thing in the fandom when of course, we've watched the YouTube, but we've never heard them sing it before. And we're so curious if they're going to include it in their set list for the Sphere residency that they're doing this summer to celebrate into the millennium. But we're all like, oh my God, we're getting No Goodbyes. It's so crazy.
Yeah. And I want to add something to the story. I was in Key West, and obviously every single for any of these bands, if it was Britney or NSYNC or whoever it was of course for a writer, like, you know, a big thing. You knew that they would put, you know, the big machine behind it, and it would be a nice paycheck. It would get all of the spins on radio, all of that kind of stuff. So obviously I was very worried that maybe they would take the song off the record or whatever, or now when it was like, they weren't really sure about the original version, and then the band went on strike. They just refused to appear anywhere. And I think this was also one of the reasons why NSYNC got a chance, because the band got very obnoxious over this song. So anytime that the Backstreet Boys would like say no to something, NSYNC would say yes to it. So I think in that period of time when the Backstreet Boys was like being problematic over this record is when, you know, NSYNC really started to take shape in a real way.
I mean, I feel like it was worth it for them to put up a stink about I Want It That Way, because that's the song.
In the end, it worked out for everyone, you know?
Right. So Mary and I are huge Backstreet Boys fans, as you could probably pick up from this conversation. What was it like recording this Millennium album or any album with them? Do you have any behind-the-scenes stories from any recording sessions that people may not know about, or memories that stand out to you from that time?
Well, I do, actually. And, you know, first of all, it was a lot of fun and games. And before I was really involved, I know it was like video games and crisps, as they say in the UK. It was like more kind of like sodas and kind of innocent. And then it turned into more kind of, you know, lavish parties and a lot of girls and all of that. But in the beginning, it was like super innocent, because I think Nick was like 13 years old or something like that first time he came over. And everyone, of course, wanted to go to Denniz' house that had all of these like computer games or video games at that time. And so it was a lot of fun and games, but I don't think the band was ever that excited about the music that they were going to record, not at least during my time. So when they came in to listen to Millennium, and I remember it very, very well, Eminem was huge at that time. I think he had put out a record called Marshall Matter or something like that. And, you know, here they're supposed to sing all of these like cheesy songs written by Swedes where the lyrics is whatever, you know. I mean, we just wrote like sound bites. We wanted it to be ear candy because we were like, you know, most people on the face of the planet is not speaking English. And to them, it's just whatever they hear. It's not about the meaning of the lyrics. So whenever people try to write meaningful lyrics, it almost got in the way for the simplicity and the catchiness of some of these songs. So they kind of had to be that way. But when the band listened to these songs, and those songs were, of course, Show Me the Meaning, Larger Than Life, I'll Be the One, Don't Want to Lose You Now, I Want It That Way. I mean, it wasn't like, oh my God, you know, like, let us start recording right now. It was kind of like more like, oh my God, okay. Is this all? Do you have anything else? I mean, it wasn't that like jumping up and down excitement, because at that time, I think Backstreet wanted to be sort of cool with their peers. I think now when they're selling out the Sphere, they're probably very excited. But at that time, it was, of course, you know, they were a boy band who would fly to Sweden to some sort of foreign guys that told them to sing my, I, you know, all that kind of stuff. And it must have been super strange for them. But I think the camaraderie, especially with Max and the trust with him and, the good melodies that would come out of Sweden and also the success that came out of these songs was like, okay, I'm willing to do this because, look at where this took me. But they were not too excited about the songs.
That is so funny. But okay, so you have to forgive my ignorance, but I want to know this before I ask my next question. When you write a song, is it like you're sitting down and you're like, we're writing this song for NSYNC? Or is it just like we're sitting down and we're going to write this song and it might go to NSYNC, it might go to Britney? Like when you sit down to write, do you know who you're writing the song for?
Well, here's another story. And please, whoever, Justin and all the guys that might tune into your podcast, they didn't have much to say, or I didn't know what they wanted to say. So I was like, bye, 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 or something like that, which I wrote with Christian and Jake. That sounded like a good title or a good soundbite. I had no idea that they were fighting with, Luke Hurlman or whatever was going on at that time. We just wrote another song. It was kind of like we had some sort of, we were tailors and here's a new suit that we just finished. Let's see if it works for you. And I was like, okay, well, it's a little short here. I'll take it in and, I alter it. But it wasn't like, now we're going to give Timberlake and Lance or JC something important to say. We just didn't have that skill and we didn't know what they wanted to sing about.
Right.
So very much what we came up with. And then depending on who was next in line, please don't hate me, but it was very factory, even though the songs were like fantastic and the bands were amazing. This whole thing was sort of a machine. So it wasn't like, oh, I broke up with my girlfriend last night and here's a ballad about that. It was like, let's pack stadiums. Like, it's not only the record, it's the tour, it's the merch, it's the hysteria that goes with it. It was like, let's create anthems and then we'll see who sings them.
That makes a lot of sense. On that note, can we talk about Bye Bye Bye? You dropped a little nugget that you wrote it about a girlfriend at the time, or can you tell us a little bit more about that one?
Well, Christian and Jake had a terrific idea called Bye Bye Bye, which was sort of a rap song. And we had a band coming in called Five. I was part of the first record with them, and then we were going to do another record. And that first record was kind of successful. Their A&R at the time was Simon Cowell, who was working for BMG UK at that point. So he became sort of a friend, and he was always around. He had a really, really good ear for music, and it was like very, very commercial. So he had heard about this song that we were going to record for them called Bye Bye Bye, but it didn't have the chorus that you guys know. It was like a rap chorus. So they started to record it, and halfway through the song, one of the guys, he took his cans off and he said, I can't sing this rubbish, and then we're leaving for the airport and the band took off. And it was funny because they were like not even 20 years old. These were like teenagers and, huge bodyguards, and they would jump into a van and they would go for the airport. They had a tour manager. They just refused to sing on this music. So we were sitting there and the phone rings and it's Simon Cowell. And he's like, oh, I'm so sorry. I'm trying to get the lads to come back. And I saw Simon a few weekends ago and we recall that incident. And he said, there was no way I could get the boys back. So we were sitting around and then we're like, how about if we rewrite this song, And the girlfriend that I had lived with, we had now broken up. So I was like full of breakup ideas. So when I came into the picture, I added that thing to it. And we started to turn some of these rap lines in the chorus into actual melodies. And it was also very formatted because, Christian thought it was fun to do. I'm doing this tonight. You're probably going to start a fight. So you have this like move, and his 2 feet would always go like this in studio. And once he could like feel it and bounce to it, and it was sort of inspired, believe it or not, we listened to a lot of Michael Jackson. So They don't really care about, they don't care about us. So you have that kind of movement, and then, doing this tonight, you're probably gonna start a fight. And it was just like filling in the blanks. And then when NSYNC reappeared, it was like, isn't that a great song for them? But we had no clue about Lou Pearlman and all of that kind of stuff.
Well, that certainly worked out perfectly. What about It's Gonna Be Me? Like, did you add some breakup feelings and angst to that one? Or was there a different motivation? Like, tell us about that one.
So that one was funny because, myself and Max and Rami was in Key West because we did a lot of writing and we hung out a lot. We had a house in Key West for inspiration. And it was kind of funny because back then, Key West wasn't the place to go. It was like, yes, it was like spring breaks and all of that kind of stuff. But it was sort of rough and seedy. But we loved going there. It was just so remote and peaceful and all of that. So one night we were like thinking about this follow-up song because Bye 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 was already recorded. I think it might have been out. It was like, we need a follow-up song. And we couldn't come up with anything. It was just like total brain freeze. And Rami, he just goes like, it should just be something simple right before dinner. Like right before we go on, are about to go out of the car and go to this restaurant called Seven Fish. He goes like, it should just be like, something like that. And Mac goes like, what is that? It's just something that came up. And I think one of them recorded it, and, that was the beginning of the song. Very, very, like, easy in a way when it kind of came to us like that, You
guys are just, I think, really good at what you do, honestly.
How did you guys, like, when you got an idea like that back then, did you carry, like, recorders around with you so you wouldn't, like, because now you have cell phones.
Yeah, exactly. We had like little dictaphones. And, when I worked on the lyric for that song, I was influenced, and this is like really crazy. I was influenced by a very weird 70s artist called Rupert Holmes. And he's the guy who wrote, If You Like Pina Colada, Getting Loose in the Rain. He had another song called Him. Him. What you gonna do about him? It's me or it's him. And I just love how that lyric was so descriptive about this love triangle. And I was very influenced by that concept of, okay, maybe this is like, she has to make a choice here between the two guys. He's not going to have it this way. And so that was kind of the template that I looked at for the lyrics.
Wow.
Yeah, like crazy ideas. If you guys would know sort of the operations, like I just told you about, They Don't Care About Us for Bye Bye Bye. It has no relationship whatsoever. But sometimes as a songwriter, you can get sort of your inspiration from something in a song that's like, okay, that inspires me to write this, And an old Rupert Holmes song was kind of like, okay, now I know what the song is about.
That's incredible insight and makes so much sense. Next, I would really like to talk to you about Britney and working with her in the Baby One More Time, Oops, I Did It Again era. Specifically on Baby One More Time, you wrote Born to Make You Happy. You also wrote another personal favorite of mine, Deep in My Heart. Tell us about that. Any memories, stories? Take us back to that time.
Yeah, well, Britney came in. Max had gone to see her in New York, and he came back. And I remember some sort of like a folder landed on my desk that said, Britney, get to know her on a first name basis. I was like, okay. And I like looked through this thing. It was kind of like a business plan. And I had Britney sitting, without any shoes on. She had like her, hands like this. And it just had this like extensive plan. And I kind of felt like this could have been anybody. They just picked this girl to be part of this kind of like, she was kind of the mold. So she came over and we, of course, worked on a lot of songs. Like, Jürgen came in with Sometimes, which was great. And Per and David and Jürgen had You Drive Me Crazy. Me and Christian had done Born to Make You Happy. I'd done Deep in My Heart with Perrin David. And Max, of course, had Baby One More Time. That was supposed to be the first record. And I remember he had worked on that in Florida. And I remember he went like, my loneliness. And he
yes.
And it was like, wow, what a great song. It's fantastic. And I think, early on, he probably heard that Britney, the way she thought she should sing these songs were not very interesting. And I think because of his influence from sort of the funk world and all of that kind of stuff came the I allow out everybody. It had that egg. And so he's like, okay, like we got to give her some sort of shtick or like some sort of thing that can work for her. So, I started hearing that from Studio One as they were recording the song, and it sounded like really great. I mean, in that lower register, they really found something special, which we didn't use for Born to Make You Happy, but that song worked anyways. And it worked terrifically for You Drive Me Crazy, obviously. But, I didn't see Britney. I didn't see that working really. And I remember Martin Dodd, who was an executive from Jive Records, he said, this is going to sell 11 million records right off the bat. She's going to be the biggest artist in the world. I was like, what? How? How would that work? Because Britney at that time wasn't a great singer. I mean, we spent 4 days per song. And obviously this was before autotune. This was before recording straight into the computer. I mean, this all went down on multi-tracks. So it was still tape. So unless you cut it and sang it in tune and perfect and all of that, and we were very like surgeons, like very rigid Swedes, and it got to be the right feel, the right, get the tuning and all that kind of stuff. So I'm sure we drove a lot of people absolutely nuts. But we would book vocals 4 days per song. And eventually it sounded amazing. I mean, it sounded great, but I didn't see it. I didn't believe in it. And I was on tour in Singapore with another artist. Her name was Jessica Falker. She was Denniz Pop's girlfriend at the time. So we were in Singapore at the Sentosa Island Hotel. So there were steps, Julian Lennon, John Lennon's son, who was signed to Jive Records, Britney Spears, who had not performed one note yet, and Jessica and myself and another guitar player. So we were performing every night for all of the people from the sort of Pan-Pacific region. And then one night, Britney's supposed to sing. And I've only seen her in like a lumber, jacket and all that. I've never seen her like made up. And she goes out next to the pool, and everyone is sitting there like candlelit dinner. And she goes up on stage and she does the song for the first time. And I'm like, oh my God, this is like one of the most special moments of my entire life. I mean, it was like Clark Kent to Superman. I mean, it was so amazing, electrifying. I mean, she was like such a natural. And then, of course, that video came out and was like, I was wrong. Sorry.
It's okay to be wrong, but you saw it and then you worked with her on Oops as well. And I have a question. I hope this is not too niche, but you worked on Can't Make You Love Me, which is one of my favorite Britney songs of all time. And I love in the final chorus, it like changes, it's usually, I'm sorry for singing, but it's like, can't make you love me. But then the last one's like, can't make you love me, baby. And I'm just curious, like what, because that like scratches such an itch in my brain. Like I talk about it with my friends. I love it. Does that just happen? Was that a conscious decision? Like just questions.
Just questions. We call it the refrain B. So if you notice, if you go through most of the Backstreet songs, that B hook exists everywhere. Nothing but a heartache. Ain't nothing but a mistake. Tell me why I never. So that's a total
You're right.
introduction at the third chorus. And that was actually something that was picked up from ABBA. And on one of their records, they started introducing a alternative chorus that would come. And it was like played by itself. And then it would perfectly work underneath the original chorus. So it became sort of a layered effect.
Oof.
So when we did Can't Make You Love Me, I remember Max came in and he started singing that melody. And that's actually myself and Max singing that hook. And it was supposed to sort of make the sort of last lift of the song. When you think you're like, okay, we squeezed everything out of this, like, let's take it to one more level before it's over. So that was the sort of a whole idea of the B hook. And I don't think you can find a Cheiron song from 1998 till the end that didn't have that.
I think I probably know that because I love all of the music that you guys worked on. It's just, for some reason, that one really did it for me. So thank you.
Thank you for saying that. But already at that point, it started becoming very hard to write songs like that because, and I think it was one of the guys from Def Leppard, 80s band that had tremendous success, especially in America. They said, eventually, everyone wanted to sound like Def Leppard, which made it very hard for us to write Def Leppard songs because we would hear like bad versions of our own stuff on the radio done by people that had not had the success yet. So they were like, to them, it was new. For us, it was just like, okay, we got to squeeze another one out of ourselves. And at the same time, we've, of course, gone from sort of being, struggling, broke musicians to young guys that had like a line of new cars who were like applauded by the whole world. And now we got to go into the studio and write another smash. And it has to be the greatest thing of all time. I mean, the pressure was so enormous. So it was kind of like getting a Lego box and you have like 6 pieces and you built every configuration you can possibly put together with these pieces. And now you're supposed to do something else. And it has to be the same, thing that we've heard before, but it has to have something new. So I think like during that record, and especially Black and Blue with the Backstreet Boys, I think it started to get very, very hard to come up with songs. I think Max wrote one of his best, obviously, Shape of My Heart is a masterpiece. But some of the other songs were like, it was difficult. So when I wrote Drowning, I gave up the whole idea of what we had done before. And I just went to Key West and me and myself and Rami turned on the country station and like, let's write a country song.
And that's Drowning. That's where Drowning came from.
We love Drowning. Well, we love literally every song you've ever written. Even like Invisible, Clay Aiken.
Oh, yeah.
Up in Vegas. Like,
yeah, Invisible was fun. I mean, it was a very hard time for me because everything had been so easy. It was like flying on a Concorde, and now you have to take a small propeller plane and, hope for the same sort of experience. And sales at that time was starting to come down, but obviously that single sold like 3 million copies. So I'm not crying, but it was tough. And sonically, we didn't know how to produce records anymore because all of that kind of like stuff that was so popular was now ridiculed by the Neptunes, who were making, super fresh stuff. And then, of course, came all the rock bands and the Goo Goo Dolls and all of that kind of stuff. So it was like in between time where we had to figure out, like, what are we going to do next? And for Max, it took almost 5 years before he hit it off again with Since You've Been Gone. But between 2000 and 2005, I think we're all kind of like, how are we going to reinvent ourselves?
Something that we ask all of our guests is when they feel like they popped. Like, when was that moment where you felt like you made it? You've been a part of so many pivotal songs in pop culture. I'm curious, what was that moment for you where you were like, oh, wow, I made it. This was huge.
Well, I mean, for me, I was always like a huge music fan. I mean, I was like, obviously having songs played on radio and being part of like enormous success. I did not have a relationship to these bands. They were a couple of kids that became successful. So when I finally got to write with people that had meant something to me, I mean, it was far from the success of anything I did with the Backstreet Boys. Like when I was put in the same room as Paul Stanley from Kiss, and I would sit there and write songs with him and we clicked and, 2 guitars was like, whatever I did that sort of paved the way to this, I was like, this is the moment that I would look back on this forever and be thankful. Obviously, I'm very thankful to all my commercial success, but some of the moments that I've had with important people that meant a lot to me because, some of these records over here that, were enormously popular, I got to get into rooms with people that, I admired forever. So those moments, I really felt that.
That makes sense. And on that note, I know it's hard to pick. It's like picking a child, but if you had to pick your favorite song that you've written or contributed to, which one would that be?
I mean, listen, when I watched Deadpool and he goes out and it's like 4 minutes of, one of the biggest blockbusters in history. And not only does it feature the whole entire song, he does the dance, all of this wow, this is like pop culture. Or when I see Super Bowl and famous actors and everyone knows these lyrics. Everyone knows these songs. And when I go out here Friday night and I have a nice meal and, somebody starts playing I Want It That Way and, the whole place goes crazy and all of a sudden it goes from a restaurant into a nightclub because of one song. I feel very, very happy. So I would say any of these songs that have kind of moved the needle a little bit, on pop culture and played a significant role perhaps for people like yourselves. Like I have great memories to one of your songs and it made me, rethink something or it took me through a heartache or inspired me to do this. I mean, I had music do that to me. So whatever I've been a part of that has done that for another person, that's the most important song for me.
Do you think the craft of songwriting for pop music has changed fundamentally since the Cheiron days? Is it a totally different beast now?
Yeah, it is a different beast. I think people are trying to really write great songs. And please tell me what the latest Bruno Mars and Lady Gaga song is called. Next to you. It's a great song, that ballad. I think people are trying to write great songs. I mean, Bruno Mars is a great songwriter. Ariana Grande, I saw her a year ago and she ran up to me and hugged me. She's like, you're part of my childhood and all of that music. Charlie Puth is another one who wants to write really, really great songs. So I think we've been sort of on a quick fix for a little bit where it's like the latest and the greatest and sort of the flavor of the month. But I think a lot of songwriters now would love to write songs that you could actually spend a month writing, that you could actually flip and turn and look at everything from all possible angles. I mean, we were kind of like Steve Jobs. He wasn't really only interested in what the Apple computer looked like from the outside, and he wanted to break it into pieces. So he would make sure that every part of the Apple computer, not even the parts that were visible to the consumer, would be perfect. And that's how we looked at songwriting. And I think more and more writers want to experience that. And they want to write songs that, could be evergreens 25, 30 years from now. That could be played by some bad local band in New Jersey in a dive bar. And it sounds amazing still. That's what you want to achieve. To answer your question, I think this thing of let's write 3 songs per day. Let the production be sort of the whole thing and sort of the lyrics and everything else kind of an afterthought where it's more kind of about effect rather than hitting, right here where you actually connect that this reminds me of something that's happening in my life right now. This is healing. This music takes me somewhere. This opens up a universe that I can only sort of feel when I'm inside of the music. Maybe I'm just old, but I think, you have to continue to kind of hit that nerve. So I hope music more will find its way back to that because I know that some of our music, we really strive to make that happen and make that sort of come to life in people, So I think the songwriting has changed a lot from being okay, it should work on an acoustic guitar. You could play I Want It That Way on an acoustic guitar, but there's a lot of songs right now you could never play on an instrument.
I selfishly hope it goes back to that too, because I feel it lacking so much in a lot of the music today, just what I get from a song. I think that's why I'm stuck listening to the old music because I just don't get the same something out of it.
Another thing, that I learned from my mentor, Paul Stanley, I mean, we listen with our eyes. This like glossy pink, baby blue, whatever, like manufactured fun stuff that smelled great, that looked great, that you put on a poster. Obviously, we love that. And, the Asian market, the J-pop market and the K-pop market, they know that's always going to work. And we kind of left that behind, and now it has to be something else. It has to be cool. It has to be edgy. It can't be too uplifting and positive. It has to be sort of a little bit more kind of like on the down. I mean, once you say, let's have fun, let's sing anthems, let's celebrate life, and let's write music that's ascending, you're going to have the same thing again.
Oh, here's hoping that it comes back. Well, you've collaborated with the biggest stars on the planet. Is there anyone left on your dream collaboration list that you have yet to collaborate with?
The thing is, like, when you won the Olympics and what went into that, all of these early mornings when you were out on the track field and you were running or you were like practicing to be the best of the best. It's wonderful to have sort of the victory and sort of that little prize somewhere on the shelf and saying, okay, I did it. But knowing what you had to do to get there, like it had to be a great song. It had to work with the artist. It had to get on radio. And now, of course, it has to end up on, the Spotify sort of top Friday list or whatever. It has to connect with the whole world. And then it's just around for 2 weeks. And then there's another song. So I would be happy if I could ever make that impact again. Obviously, I would love to do it with someone who is a real artist, like an Adele, and what is a real artist? I mean, forgive me for saying that, but someone who has kind of more of a unique tone, something to say, who's not just a gimmick, but someone who's like a fantastic singer. I mean, I would love to experience that again. And if I can contribute something to someone, where the song actually takes them to a place they haven't been before, I mean, it could almost be anyone. If Elvis was around, I'd love to have an Elvis song. I mean, something like that, something impossible, or Michael Jackson collaboration. But I don't know. I can tell you, though, that when we worked with Celine in Florida, in Jupiter, and we did That's the Way It Is, I had that moment. I mean, that was the dream. If I could have picked one artist in the whole world at that time to work with, it was Celine Dion. And it happened, and it turned out amazing. That's probably my favorite song. When I hear it today, I'm so proud of it. It's a song called That's the Way It Is.
That is my go-to karaoke song. So I want to thank you personally for giving that gift to all of us.
It's beautiful. She's a generational talent. I can only imagine how incredible that must have been.
So gifted and so unique. The way she used her voice as an instrument at that time. She just came off Titanic, and we were sitting in Palm Beach and was like waiting for her to get ready. I remember the console at the studio was not working. So it was like, oh, it's probably a bad excuse. She doesn't like the song. So she's making up an excuse, and now she's going to be gone. So we were like on the beach for 3 days. There's actually a picture, you can probably find it online, of Max, myself, and Christian and Humberto Gatica. Max is like on the beach waiting for Celine, and he got very, very tan. But one night they called and said, oh, she's ready to sing. And she sang that song, and it was like an outer space kind of like experience. It was like goosebumps.
That's one of those songs that, however many years later, it evokes a feeling. It evokes goosebumps, the key change, just everything about it. Incredible. You're incredible. We want to be respectful of your time. We are just so grateful.
Listen, I have all the time in the world. I just notice how I just talk and talk and talk. So put me on mute, do whatever.
No. Oh, well, we are so appreciative, so grateful for all you've contributed to music. We hope to maybe see you in Sweden one day, or maybe at the Sphere in Las Vegas. Who knows?
Yeah, I actually wrote AJ the other day and said, any tickets left? So I want to go. No goodbyes.
Yes. We need to witness that song live with you in the audience. Okay. That's just like a dream.
So that would be our first meeting. And second time will be when you come to Sweden. I'll be the tour guide. We're going to go to Cheiron Studios. I'm going to show you all the hot spots, and it'll be fun.
We actually talk about, we're like, we need to go to Sweden.
We've been talking about this for years.
We're not even joking, but do people do that? Do they come and like pop music fans?
God, listen, back in the day, and still to this day, it was almost like Graceland. You know how everywhere on the wall, there's people have scribbled stuff. If you look at the Cheiron building, is filled with that. I would basically go to work, and there would be people in sleeping bags. There would be people everywhere from all over the world. And still to this day, it's weekly people coming to just take a look and try to get in and get a feel for it. It's a very important place, for some reason. And I also think there's almost like a Last Supper kind of quality to it, because Denniz, he died when he was 35 years old. And he was the guy who was the visionary who said, we're going to make something special come out of Sweden. And he brought 7 kids who had nothing to do with each other and created this magic under that roof. And when I came out of it, it was like coming out of the Fame machine. I was tired for years. I mean, it was the grind in there was crazy. And we gave everything we had to those bands and the songs that we did. When people ask me, you want to experience it again? I said, no, thank you. It was great when it happened, but never again.
Never again.
The
pressure was tremendous, obviously.
Oh, I bet.
Mary and I always say how grateful we are that we grew up with the music that we did, and that literally is because of you. So thank you again for being the soundtrack of our childhoods, of our adolescence. Such a formative time in our life. We were looking for meaning in those lyrics.
Well, thank you, Andreas. This was really a bucket list interview for us, so we appreciate you immensely.
I'm going to tune in. I hope you got all your questions answered.
Yes.
We could talk to you for literally weeks, but this was great.
Don't open that door, but this was perfect.
We'll do a part 2. I have more stories.
Would love that. Awesome.
I'll take you up on that. Hopefully in Vegas over cocktails.
Yes. Oh, great.
Okay, that was our conversation with Andreas Carlsson. We're smiling ear to ear because he just told us so many stories that we've been wondering for so long.
The rest of the day, Kelsey and I are going to be planning our trip to Sweden. Kelsey, could he have been nicer, or I just could not have expected anything more from that interview. He was incredible.
So generous in his storytelling. We were just looking at each other, our eyes were getting wider
Saucers.
and wider with every story.
Saucers.
I mean, I think people get really starstruck when they meet, Backstreet Boys, Britney, NSYNC, but to us, Andreas and Max, and I mean,
those are ours.
They are our Mount Rushmore of pop culture icons. I mean, he truly wrote the soundtrack to our lives. And that's accurate. That's 100% true when we say that. Every song that we loved growing up, he had a hand in it. And it's just really special that he was willing to join us. And he was so lovely.
And without him, without them, the Cheiron team with their jackets, their matching jackets, we wouldn't have our other favorites.
So I think we need to find a photo of the jackets and...
Can I order a jacket for myself?
We'll make it 2.0 so we're not just clearly ripping it off, but I think some Cheiron merch could be cool.
I would actually wear Cheiron merch because
Me too.
But people need to recognize that without them, we wouldn't have the X. We wouldn't have Britney. We wouldn't have Backstreet Boys, because who knows if they would have hit like they would have without those songs.
No, they wouldn't have. And it's kind of funny to me that they were dragging their feet to record some of these Millennium songs. And I totally get it, knowing the background of what the music landscape looked like at the time. But those songs meant everything to us.
He's I'm sure they're grateful now that they're selling out this way. I'm yeah, damn straight, they better be grateful now.
But we are grateful as the fans, as the people who listen to these. We listen to that CD. I listened to it every night as I fell asleep from the year 1999 to 2005. It's just really special.
And I just have trouble, as I said, finding music that evokes similar reactions. And that might be partially how young we were, but it also speaks
nostalgia element
to the music, I would say.
He's right. Songs now are very, I remember that song was big in the summer of 2005. And then we kind of move on. Like Espresso by Sabrina, like we'll always think of last summer when we think of that song, but we've kind of moved on and the new song of the moment. And maybe it's because of TikTok, there's a trending sound. We hear it all the time and then we just move on a lot quicker.
Yeah, we do. But yeah, I'm starstruck. That could have not been more amazing. We are so grateful to him. Just wow. That's it. That's all we got.
The woman was speechless
for once.
Hopefully we get to see Andreas in Vegas. That would be so cool. Once again, I didn't realize that Andreas was also a part of the writing process for No Goodbyes, the I Want It That Way version. That makes sense. I thought that in everything we had read, it was kind of like Mutt Lange just kind of took it over. So I think it's very cool. And I also didn't realize that they filmed an alternate music video.
I don't know. But that's what we're going to do part 2 because we have more questions.
Part 2, catch us in Vegas.
Or Sweden.
Or Sweden, both. Catch us in Vegas and then Sweden. We will plan a boy band trip to Mecca, aka Sweden.
We've done Orlando. Now we're going to Sweden.
We started in Orlando. Now we need to go across the Atlantic to the real home of where it all began. And actually, I don't want Andreas to see us at a Backstreet Boys concert because he will see that we are one of the fans who faints
at the barrier. I literally did that 2 summers ago.
Mary was a fainter, but it was because it was hot.
Yeah, it wasn't like
overcome with emotion. Well, thank you to Andreas and thank you all for listening. We're so grateful for all the support. Make sure to subscribe, give us 5 stars, leave a review, and make sure you're following at When They Popped Pod. We'll be posting some really fun video snippets from this interview.
Yes. Oh my God. So much content to come. Thanks for listening. Bye.
Bye.